And would you say as well that, I mean, Auckland is particularly bad because what people are getting for their money, what you're seeing people get for their money is sometimes disgraceful.
Look, I just can't understand how on earth the rents in Auckland have got so high so quickly. It's just exorbitant. But I also can't understand how families are affording to pay those rents. And I think that they're almost at breaking point. And I expect that what we've seen is about as much as we're going to see in rent rises. The other problem, I think, is outside of Auckland, where a lot of the housing is in very poor quality because it's not been looked after for a number of years. And so in many parts of New Zealand, particularly the colder parts, I think there's a real problem around the quality of housing that perhaps you don't have in Auckland.
But you're also implying, aren't you, just finally, that people are buying a house to make a bob, and the bob disappears if you spend too much on the house. So that is a fairly fundamental part of the problem. It is, and part of the problem too is that if you look at the rents relative to the value of the house, they make a very poor return. And if the people have borrowed heavily to buy their house as an investment, then they're probably losing cash on the deal. And I think Andrew King in his comments makes that point. But the reality is that they're not there necessarily for the rent income, they're there for the capital gains. And so, of course, they're going to be saying, look, we're not making any money on it this year. We're reluctant to spend a huge amount of money. And so there is that sort of attitude. And I think ideally what we want to try and do, and we can do that through legislation, I believe, is to ask that we have actually a professional approach to renting houses out, and that we expect landlords to be professional and to comply with standards that are adequate. Very good. Thank you, Alan. Alan Johnson from the Salvation Army. Now 3 minutes to 5. One of my new neighbours has informed me in writing that if I appear on her side of my shrubbery, I'd be in my garden at that stage, she will turn the hose on me. I am 78, Hilary Phillips. Oh, I know.
I mean, that's why there's always a market for that Neighbours at War program, isn't there?
Exactly.
Because, crikey, there are some issues. Do you know what's one of the biggest issues with neighbours? Trees.
Yeah.
Trees,
True.
Trees are a big issue right across the country.
Yeah, if we had no trees, it wouldn't be a problem.
It would be no problem.
Now,
not a huge problem in a multi-storey apartment building.
That's right.
If there are any trees in there, there's other issues.
Yeah.
Some bright ideas very quickly from the United Kingdom to combat obesity. The National Health Service wants families to get discounts on their supermarket shopping if they hit weekly exercise step targets, which would be measured by an app. Also planned are free bikes provided courtesy of developers of apartments, special sprinting tracks on footpaths, outdoor public gyms. With the supermarket vouchers, should you get fitter, you'd get cheaper sports gear and free cinema tickets.
So good. Good on you, NHS. I think that is absolutely outstanding.
Do you think it will work?
Yes.
Okay.
Like, if you think about some of, like, what's that amazing guy that lost all the weight, Brown Butterbean, the boxer?
Yes.
Now he takes free boot camps out in South Auckland. The amount of people whose lives he's changed by giving something for free because, gym memberships and all that kind of stuff are expensive.
He's fairly remarkable, though.
Yeah. So if you just give, a lot of it's to do with money. So a lot of people that are overweight can't afford to go to the gym and things like that. That's probably a bit of a generalisation.
I know what you're saying.
Give it a whirl. I think it's great.
Neil, last word.
I think part of the problem is that they're spending all their money at the supermarket already.
Neil Miller. Neil Miller has been on the panel with Brodie Kane. Thank you both.
Cheers.
Checkpoint coming right up with John Campbell.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight the government opens its books and reveals an extra $2 billion in the coffers. But for how long and what then? And where, if anywhere, will it be spent? And what would Labor do? All the big questions. Labor's finance spokesperson Grant Robertson and National Stephen Joyce joins us live, and Jane Patterson analyses it all for us. Also tonight, Christchurch will get a new stadium with 4 options, but there is a preferred candidate. And what is the true cost of the Christchurch Convention Centre? How much will it really cost? Plus, we're in Edgecombe as residents plan a class action against the Bay of Plenty Regional Council following the devastating April floods. When the local river burst its banks, we talked to a man who is still drying out his house.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat and tēnei. The Labour leader has ruled out any income tax increases under a Labour government, including to the top rate. Jacinda Ardern says she was waiting to see the government's books in the pre-election update before specifically ruling out any income tax rises. The update released today shows a surplus $2 billion bigger than forecast in May, but surpluses from 2019 are smaller than forecast. Ms Ardern says Labour can afford to fund its promises within the current settings.
We've looked at the books and what's available now. We believe we can deliver on what our policy intentions are with what is available. So we will not be campaigning on a top tax rate. I have no intention of giving that to the tax working group that we'll be establishing, and it's not part of our plan.
Jacinda Ardern, National's finance spokesperson Stephen Joyce, says that given the new forecasts, there's not a lot of extra money for political parties to spend over the next few years. The ACT leader, David Seymour, has told a business audience in Wellington that the New Zealand First MP, Richard Prosser, is an effing idiot. He was responding to comments by Mr Prosser about his party's policy of renationalising power companies. Mr Prosser told the Business New Zealand election conference New Zealand First wants to buy back key state assets at the price they were sold for. Mr Seymour later addressed the audience.
I realise that in a role such as mine, you're supposed to have a certain amount of decorum, but that makes me really angry. What a f***ing idiot. I mean, seriously, you know? I mean, what an idiot.
David Seymour then went on to make disparaging remarks about Mr Prosser's weight. The Prime Minister says the decision on whether or not to send more Defence Force personnel to Afghanistan will be made before the election. The government has been considering a request from the United States made on behalf of the NATO-led force to send 2 more people. Bill English says there's been no request for combat troops and none would be sent this close to an election. New Zealand withdrew its final provincial reconstruction team in 2013, but 10 officers are still helping to train the Afghan army. A former Health Board chairman says the Canterbury District Health Board's finances should be independently reviewed. The DHB is at loggerheads with the Health Ministry, which is demanding it cut its deficit by $36 million by such measures as curtailing international travel, reducing the number of managers and cutting frontline services. Victoria University's Dean of Health, Gregor Kostor, says that won't go far enough and an independent review is needed to help a high-performing DHB that's facing large quake-related expenses.
They have received some additional support from government, but I think in the present circumstance we need to have another look at the population-based funding formula and see whether that does need any adjustment, and indeed whether there are any other approaches that could help the District Health Board achieve a balanced budget.
Gregor Costa of Victoria University. The President of Federated Farmers supports a coroner's call for compulsory rollover protection on quad bikes. Earlier today, Coroner Brigitte Windley says it's imperative the government do more to address the high number of quad bike deaths. The Farming Lobby's group head, Katie Milne, says she's monitoring the results of tougher rules introduced in some Australian states and will push for a change here if those rules reduce the death and injury toll. A prisoner who says he was repeatedly raped by his cellmate is suing the Department of Corrections for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The prisoner is giving evidence at the trial of William Katipa, who has denied 14 charges relating to sexual offending against 3 prisoners he shared a cell with. Edward Gay reports from the High Court in Auckland.
Under cross-examination, the prisoner today confirmed he's instructed a lawyer and papers have been filed in the High Court. The courts heard that the claim is for hundreds of thousands of dollars, although the prisoner himself said he believed it was for $90,000. He confirmed there were inconsistencies between the claim filed against Corrections and the evidence he had given in court, but said he'd not seen a draft of the papers before they were filed. The prisoner also confirmed the money would change his life. I Tamaki Makoto ko Edward Gay aho.
It's 5:04. Sport and a New South Wales court has granted the Western Force the right to appeal against the Australian Rugby Union's decision to axe the team from the Super Rugby competition. The judge said that after reading written submissions from both the Force and the ARU, he believed an appeal should be heard and he'd go straight into hearing it. The Warriors halfback Shaun Johnson has allayed fears of a possible player strike during the Rugby League World Cup later this year. Close to 300 players met earlier in the week to discuss the NRL's latest collective bargaining agreement offer 14 months after negotiations began. While both sides agree that a deal should be reached before the deadline of October the 31st, players have threatened to take industrial action during the tournament if their demands aren't met. Johnson, however, doesn't think it will come to that.
As players, that's the last thing we want to do, but look, we've got full confidence in our in our group that we've got, fronting us for this, and whatever they think's right, we'll go with. But, I'm sure that we can come to some sort of agreement before we even get close to that stage.
Shaun Johnson. The All Whites captain Winston Reid will miss New Zealand's World Cup qualifiers against the Solomon Islands through injury. He suffered a calf injury during West Ham's Premier League warm-up game against Southampton last weekend. Chris Wood will captain the team instead. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Pablo Perez Fernandes is on the line from Brazil. It seems pretty much every politician is tainted by the current round of corruption scandal. And episode 4 of Bang looks at sexuality in long-term relationships. Yes, the L word may get a mention. I'm talking about the 4-letter one. And your comments and questions for our post-Bang discussion are most welcome. Email nights@radionz.co.nz and join me, Brian Crump, from Afternoon News at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula fine, apart from some isolated showers mainly in the east. Gisborne mainly fine, a few light showers possible about the coast. For the remainder of the North Island, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury fine with morning frost. For Buller and Westland fine, apart from a few showers. Fiordland, Southland and Otago, occasional rain about Fiordland and Stewart Island. Cloudy periods elsewhere with scattered showers tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands mostly cloudy with occasional showers. It's 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Welcome to Checkpoint, everyone. Thank you for being with us. Coming up on the program tonight, Edgecombe, the water that is still being dried out of some homes. Remember, the floods were in April, and the possibility of a class action against the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. How much will Christchurch's convention centre actually cost, and what's the preferred option for a stadium in our second largest city? The Black Ferns make the final of the World Cup. I spoke to their tireless lock after they won their semi-final against the USA. In fact, by the time we got through to them, it was about 1:45, and that tells you something about the spirit in this team, that they're taking media calls at that time, because you've got more chance of talking to Lord Lucan than you have of speaking to an All Black at 12:15, and much more on the program tonight. But first, opening the books, a second family's income package, including tax cuts, could be on the cards under a national government, but not for another 3 years. The government today opened the books ahead of the election, revealing a one-off $2 billion boost to the surplus this year. That's prompted Labor to say it can afford not to put up income tax, particularly those top rates, if it becomes government. But there's a catch to the forecast today. Growth will drop away in coming years. In fact, surpluses from 2019 to 2021 are lower than estimated in the May budget. Making some sense of all of this, here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
It's the day politicians have been waiting for before they put the finishing touches on their election campaign promises. But the Finance Minister Stephen Joyce is urging caution, saying there's little room to move within the current budget.
There's a little bit at the end of the current financial year, but very little from there on. There's about a $2 billion increase in the surplus in this financial year just finished, but that does flow away again over the next couple of years. So you're only talking potentially a few $100 million a year at this point.
National unveiled a $2 billion a year incomes package, including tax cuts in the May budget. And Mr Joyce says they'd like to introduce another one in a few years.
Firstly, we've got to complete the first one. That doesn't happen until April 1 of next year and is, of course, built into these forecasts. But then the second one, if we were able to do it, would be in around 2020, unless economic conditions were significantly better.
Labour's leader Jacinda Ardern has welcomed confirmation from National it would not make further tax cuts in the near future.
The government has made the right decision in ruling out tax cuts. Of course, that was always our position. You'll recall that at budget time, we certainly were the only party to vote against tax cuts at that time. because our view was there was such a deficit in social spending, there was not room for any such promises and pledges.
In terms of Labour's own plans, Ms Ardern has ruled out any income tax increases under a Labour government, including to the top rate. She says Labour can afford to fund its spending promises without needing extra income tax.
We've looked at the books and what's available now. We believe we can deliver on what our policy intentions are with what is available. So we will not be campaigning on a top tax rate. I have no intention of giving that to the tax working group that we'll be establishing, and it's not part of our plan.
What TV series was written as a prequel to Outrageous Fortune?
West Side.
West Side.
While the Treasury was opening the books, the National Party leader Bill English was talking business startups and being a quizmaster at Biz Dojo in Wellington. Speaking to reporters afterwards, he said the pre-election update shows the economy is in good shape.
The forecasts show growth's a bit softer, but pleasingly they also show lower unemployment and more consistent growth in wages.
The Green Party leader James Shaw says some of the underlying numbers are not good news.
Wages in particular are stagnant, projected to be stagnant over the next few years. Productivity, still really stagnant. While GDP is growing, actually GDP per capita is declining. And so some of those kind of indicators show that, the numbers that Stephen Joyce likes to throw around don't actually match up with some of the underlying reality.
The ACT leader David Seymour says surpluses are nothing to celebrate.
The government over the next 4 years is going to take a $15 billion surplus. That's a $15 billion deficit for households.
The government has been under pressure over health spending in recent weeks amid reports of growing district health board deficits and long waits for surgery at Dunedin Hospital. The Council of Trade Unions economist Bill Rosenberg says the fiscal numbers don't show the whole picture.
What the DHBs are doing is because their hospitals are under such pressure, both because they're emergency operations and because of the public gaze on them, they've been channeling their funding to those hospitals at the expense of the community and primary health services that they also fund.
Stephen Joyce was asked if, under the forecasts, the government has adequately accounted for future demands on the health service. He said it had, with the government investing significant amounts of money into the sector. Mr Joyce says the Canterbury DHB deficit, for example, could be fixed by changing some accounting measures, citing a recent PwC report.
Most of, particularly Canterbury DHB's issues are non-cash. And they make some suggestions which are, a number of which are in the area of what you call accounting adjustments that would solve a fair bit of that pressure.
The pre-election update also shows economic growth will not be as strong as predicted in May. However, there has been an improvement in expected debt levels in the next 4 years, with net core Crown debt expected to come down a lot more quickly, dropping below 20% of GDP by 2021. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
So what's this mean during the election campaign and for whoever is government beyond it? Stephen Joyce and Grant Robertson will join us live on the program after 6 o'clock. We head now to Christchurch, where a pre-feasibility study for a stadium to replace Lancaster Park, destroyed by the earthquake, of course, seems to have alighted upon a preference for a new sports and events arena. Multi-use is the term, costing about $496 million and featuring a fixed roof and a retractable playing field. Now, we'll have more on that shortly, including the details of the design. But Christchurch is also going to get a new convention centre, and both the local support for that and the numbers around it have been somewhat less certain. How much will it cost exactly? And what is the business case for it? We've been working on finding out.
Now it's time to focus on getting the central business district here and the key projects in this part of the city up and moving.
That's Bill English, August 10th, a fortnight ago tomorrow, holding a media conference on the Convention Centre building site in central Christchurch. A few minutes earlier, Ross Butler, the chairman of the Crown-owned company Otakaro, had proudly played tour guide.
So here we have 150 metres both ways, lengthways and acrossways. It's a huge position within Christchurch.
And Bill English was there to announce what was going on it.
This is one of the largest projects here in the middle of the city, and I'm pleased to announce that CPB Contractors Limited have been awarded a $240 million contract to complete the design and the construction of the convention centre.
The figure, as you heard, was $240 million. It was quickly picked up by the media, including us here on Checkpoint. We covered the announcement and that figure, as did Fairfax.
Christchurch's $240 million convention centre set to be complete by early 2020.
TVNZ.
Contract for $240 million Christchurch convention
And the government's own media team, who issued a release with that $240 million figure. But that seemed cheap, really cheap. And the following week, Checkpoint obtained a document from Otokaro's predecessor, Sarah, with an indicative cost of $443 million, $200 million more. Why the difference? And what is the real cost of the Christchurch Convention Centre?
This announcement today is really a significant investment in Christchurch and the South Island, investment in our prosperity and our future.
That was Nikki Wagner, Christchurch Regeneration Minister, who was also there at the announcement. And what you could see beneath Minister Wagner, PM English and Ross Butler was the land. Flat, remediated, large and, yes, valuable. And not, as far as we could find, mentioned in any costings. So we went to the Minister's office and asked how much the land had cost. The answer?
$74 million.
Remediation?
$4 million.
Admin, consent work and professional services to get to this point?
$34 million.
And all of that is over and above the $240 million figure. None of it was mentioned at the announcement. None of it was mentioned in the government statements on the centre. So we went back to the Minister's office. If you add all of that in and include all other extra costs, what's the projected final cost of the convention centre? Not $240 million, but what? This morning they emailed us the answer.
$475 million.
That's twice the figure publicly available, which makes the economic case for the convention centre a higher bar to get over. So what is the economic case? Bill English.
It's estimated that the economic benefit to Canterbury more broadly will be over $300 million over the next 8 years as we attract more tourists and convention goers to Christchurch and in particular to the middle of the city.
Over $300 million over its first 8 years, which is what Nikki Wagner said in her media release from August 10.
The direct economic benefit of the convention centre is estimated to be more than $320 million in the first 8 years.
Which was elaborated on at the announcement.
And you have to remember, of course, that tourists, particularly convention tourists, spend a lot more money than ordinary tourists. So we want these upmarket tourists here.
Which sounds good, but where did the figure come from? A direct economic benefit of $320 million over the first 8 years. We asked for the Crown's business case, not yet available. So who came up with the $320 million figure? That, the Minister's office told us by email, was in the operator's business case. So who's the operator? Well, it's the hotel chain, Accor. So the actual cost of the Christchurch Convention Centre is twice the figure of $240 million given out on August 10th. And the economic benefit figure the government is using to justify the convention centre seems to come from the hotel company the Crown has picked as its preferred convention centre operator. So, $240 million is the figure publicly cited, but add land and other expenses and the full and total cost is double that. Now, we want to stress that it was the Minister's own office that told us via email, and this is a verbatim quote, the economic benefit figures came from the operator's business case. We emailed back, operators meaning Accor, the verbatim answer email back, yes, but who the operator is actually depends on who owns the convention centre once it's built. So the answer, operator means Accor, yes. More on that in a moment, but first, having communicated with her office over a period of days, this afternoon we asked the Minister herself, what is the final cost?
We think about $475 million.
Right, which is twice the figure that was used, the $240 million that was used on August 10th at the announcement in Christchurch, isn't it?
Yes. The $240 million is the construction contract.
So where is the...
we've had land acquisition and professional services and all the rest around it as well.
Right. So where is the $475 million publicly announced?
Well, each individual part of it is probably available, but the whole lot, there's still a little bit about contracting with someone who's going to run it, so there's still a little bit to come.
Okay, who's going to run it?
Well, at this stage, the contract will be leased probably by the end of the year. We're still working through that.
So you're spending $475 million on a convention centre and you don't yet know who's going to run it?
That's absolutely right, but it has been worked with operators all the way through the design of the establishment, and the way it works, it is very attractive to operators, and we've got several operators who are interested.
OK, so will the operators lease it off the Crown?
Yes, there is an arrangement, there is a contractual arrangement, and that's something that we're working through at the moment. We have funding to make that work. There will be some leasing, and we'll make that progress as we go.
So will the Crown retain ownership but lease operation rights effectively to an independent operator?
At this stage, that's what we're planning, but we also have quite a lot of interest from people who may like to take over the ownership of the property in the long term.
Right, so you have people expressing interest in buying it for somewhere in the region of $500 million.
And also people expressing interest in operating it as well.
OK. Why won't you release the Crown's business case that talks about economic benefit for Christchurch?
Well, the original business case that was written in 2013 has already been released. The benefit that we're talking about is something like $321 million in the first 8 years, and they're expecting about 57 to 60 million in the years after that. But as I say, we're still in a contracting situation with the operator, and so we would rather work our way through that before we release it. But once that is done, I'm very happy to release it.
So the direct economic benefit of the convention centre to Christchurch is estimated to be more than $320 million in the first 8 years. I'm reading from your media statement on August 10th.
Mm-hmm.
Who made that estimate?
That's part of the business case.
Yes, but where did that figure...
Remembering, of course, we are replacing the convention centre that we used to have in Christchurch. And before the earthquake, we were also working towards an extension of that convention centre.
Absolutely. Sorry, Minister. Who made the $320 million estimate?
That was part of the business case.
Yes, but who made it? Where did that figure come from? I know it was
I can't give you the details.
Was it from your operator? Was it from Otokaro's preferred operator?
I suspect it was from a mixture of all of those because, of course, we want to test anything that we said in the public arena.
OK, we've been told it was from Otokaro's preferred operator, who is Accor, the hotel chain, right?
The Accor chain were people that were working on it to help us get the configuration and how the actual operations work of the building. So they have worked through the process as we've gone, but they may or may not be the operator in the long term.
OK, but at the moment they have an economic benefit from their participation in this, don't they?
Well, that's where the knowledge would have come from, but I suspect it's also been peer-reviewed because we don't tend to put out figures without testing them.
Do you know whether it's been peer-reviewed?
I can find out for you.
OK. Is it possible that as Otokaro's preferred operator, the hotel chain Accor would run the convention centre?
It is possible, but not definite.
OK, so you are citing a figure of $320 million economic benefit to Christchurch over 8 years, which has come to you from a commercial hotel chain that has a direct commercial interest in working with Otokaro and potentially running the convention centre.
Yes, but you must look at it another way. When we designed the convention centre, we were very sure that we wanted to make sure that it would be commercially viable. So we worked with Accor to make sure that the sizes of the rooms were right, that how you move them from A to B, that the kitchens worked, so that therefore we had something that was a good commercial proposition. We've also spoken to other operators, and they tell us that basically if it works for Accor, it works for them. So they are not the only people involved in this. They have not captured the process.
No, but you are citing their figure, aren't you, when you talk about the economic benefit to Christchurch?
I will confirm where that figure came from.
Okay,
the figure was from the business case. I suspect it would have been peer-reviewed simply because we don't throw figures around willy-nilly.
You heard the Minister say she would call us back, she would confirm, and she did exactly that. Now, remember, it was her office who told us in writing the $320 million figure was the operator's figure, and the operator was Accor. But the Minister wanted to call us back, and indeed she was good to her word, and she did. A short time ago, our producer Bridget Burke asked her if Accor had any input into the $320 million cost-benefit figure.
As far as I know, no.
Can you be certain of that, Minister?
Well, they have their own figures which are different.
What are their figures?
Well, those are the ones in the operating case that we're not talking about today.
Last year, the design and construction contract was valued at $280 million. It was announced earlier in the month as $240. Why the saving?
The $240 million one is the contract, the construction contract that came through. We've been working very hard to make sure that we have a cost-effective contract.
So how were those savings managed?
Well, the original figure was on a slightly larger convention centre. This is slightly smaller all the way across, and basically whenever you look at a project you work the way down to make it as cost effective as possible.
So the convention centre has in a sense been scaled back, you're telling me?
Fractionally, yes.
And so should then you still be relying on a 2016 figure by HSERA for benefit to Christchurch?
Yes, we think it's plenty of space in that to be realistic.
Despite the fact that the convention centre is now been scaled back?
Oh, but marginally. At the most, maybe 100 people.
That's Nikki Wagner talking a very short time ago to our producer Bridget Burke. So here's what we can confirm. The cost is $475 million. We think this is the first time that figure has been published anywhere. The size of the convention centre has been scaled back by somewhere in the region of 100 seats, people, whatever. So it's a smaller convention centre than the one that we have been told about. But the government is standing by its cost-benefit analysis. In other words, the money that will come into Christchurch of $320 million over the first 8 years. It's 26.5 minutes past 5. The ACT Party leader David Seymour used an expletive, a good old-fashioned Anglo-Saxon expletive, as he ridiculed a New Zealand First candidate after he outlined the party's plan to buy back the country's power companies at their original sale price. Richard Prosser made the comments at a business conference in Wellington today. Later, New Zealand First leader Winston Peters said his MP had got the policy wrong, that shares would only be bought when they became available. Jacob McSweeney heard it all because he was at the conference.
New Zealand First state-owned enterprises spokesperson Richard Prosser didn't beat around the bush when he powered up his party's policy to a business audience today.
I'm going to start off by throwing a cat amongst the pigeons. It's the same one that I threw 3 years ago. In terms of the electricity market, we have a distinct policy to bring the major generation assets that were built by taxpayers over the previous decades back under a single state-owned, state-controlled umbrella. So that means if you've got shares in Contact, get rid of them now.
When the MPs from all parties had all had their turn, the audience were invited to ask questions. In stepped Tony Nagel, the General Manager of Corporate Affairs at electricity retailer and generator Mercury.
I have a question for Richard Prosser. You said that you were going to nationalise or renationalise the electricity companies. Just a very quick calculation in my head, allowing for the half of Contact, Mercury and Genesis that the government doesn't already own, and all of Contact, that would be around about 11 or 12 billion. So how are you going to fund that?
It was Richard Prosser's response that got the room laughing.
This is not going to be, write a cheque today and go try cash it tomorrow. These institutions will be purchased back at whatever they were sold for, and not more than that. We signalled that a couple of years ago. Well, look, we did. We said that's what was going to happen.
The New Zealand First MP told the audience there were a variety of ways to buy the power companies back, such as using long-term infrastructure bonds. ACT leader David Seymour didn't pull any punches as he laid into Mr Prosser's comments.
To come and tell you that a stock trading at $5.85 is going to be nationalised at $3.10 and you better all sell it. Well, I realise that in a role such as mine, you're supposed to have a certain amount of decorum, but that makes me really angry. What a f***ing idiot. I mean, seriously, I mean, what an idiot. But that's actually the reality, and that's someone who can barely manage his own diet and exercise regime and thinks that he's going to be managing a ministerial post.
Labour ditched its NZ Power plan, which aimed to set up a single buyer for the country's power generation in 2015, after it failed to attract voters at the last election. The Green Party have also overhauled their proposal since 2014. MP Gareth Hughes says electricity prices are still too high and that needs to change.
In terms of electricity affordability, we've proposed recycling the dividends paid to the state to support those low-income houses with a winter energy payment. And then when it comes to finding more efficiencies in the electricity system, we've proposed greater cooperation amongst our 29 distribution monopolies, the alliance companies.
National's Energy and Resources spokesperson Judith Collins argues New Zealand's electricity market is solid. She said consumers spend 2.9% of average weekly spending on their power bill.
The electricity sector, by the way, is working really well, and that's backed up by the International Energy Agency, who just this year said that New Zealand is world leading thanks to appropriately targeted government intervention.
But it was New Zealand First's policy that hogged the headlines today, forcing its leader Winston Peters to step in this afternoon and describe Mr Pross's comments as a throwaway line. Mr Peters says the party is proposing to buy back the power companies by purchasing their shares when they become available. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Cor Jacob McSweeney, aho.
Coming up on the programme between now and 6, we're in Edgecombe as residents hold a meeting to discuss the possibility of a class action against the Bay of Plenty Regional Council following the devastating April flood when the Rangitaiki River burst the town's stop bank. It really was very ineffectual. Was that an act of God or nature or whatever you call it, or a really inadequate wall? We've talked about the cost of the new Christchurch Convention Centre, but the city also came a step closer today to a new stadium. That appears to be fully costed up front. Later, the two finance spokespeople for Labour and National join us live to discuss the opening of the books. We'd love your feedback on any or all of this. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. You can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Giles next with business news, but before it all, Katrina Batten sitting patiently with the headlines.
The Labour leader has ruled out any income tax increases under a Labour government, including to the top rate. Jacinda Ardern says she was waiting to see the government's books in the pre-election update before specifically ruling out any income tax rises. The update released today shows a surplus $2 billion bigger than forecast in May, but surpluses from 2019 are smaller than forecast. National's finance spokesperson Stephen Joyce says if re-elected, National would look at a second family's income package in 2020. The Prime Minister says a decision on whether or not to send more Defence Force personnel to Afghanistan will be made before the election. The government has been considering a request from the United States made on behalf of the NATO-led force to send 2 more people. Bill English says there's been no request for combat troops and none would be sent this close to an election. A former Health Board chairman says the Canterbury District Health Board's finances should be independently reviewed. The DHB is at loggerheads with the Health Ministry, which is demanding it cut its deficit by $36 million. Victoria University's Dean of Health, Gregor Costa, says an independent review is needed to help a high-performing DHB that's facing large quake-related expenses. The police have deployed pepper spray and pepper balls to disperse crowds in Phoenix, Arizona, after protesters outside a rally by the US President Donald Trump threw rocks and bottles at officers. At the rally, Mr. Trump defended his record on opposing racial hatred. He launched a blistering attack on the media, accusing journalists of misrepresenting his position on white supremacist violence. The police say the death of a baby in Christchurch this morning is not suspicious. They had said earlier today that the baby had died at a property in the suburb of Aranui. The death will be referred to the coroner. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. It's about 26 and a half minutes away. Turning to business news now with Giles Beckford, our business editor, who's beaming in a magnificent red jersey from Wellington. Another crop of company results, Giles, and the most interesting in New Zealand, I think.
Indeed, after last year's stellar performance, which was $463 million, of course the expectations had to be watered down a wee bit given the environment that the airline operates in. So it was. The result was $382 million. It's still its second best profit in the years that it's been going. And it's quite clear there are just really a lot of competitive and intensive competitive pressures out there. Too many airlines chasing the available passengers, to put it rather crudely. Too many seats and not enough bums to go on them. Means, of course, they had to cut prices in order to maintain market share. That fell a little bit. Their revenue fell a little bit. But Air New Zealand is facing some really strong pressures in the past year. Jetstar on some of the regional routes here in New Zealand. There were 10 new airlines flying into New Zealand on foreign routes last year. All in all, you could understand why Christopher Luxon, the chief executive, was feeling the pressure.
2017 was a challenging year and one we did not take lightly. We knew there would be an impact as we moved very quickly from a relatively benign competitive environment to one that was filled with a number of new carriers. In that context, I'm extremely pleased with how we responded to that competition and the momentum we saw towards the end of the year. Our ultimate goal is providing sustainable, strong returns for our shareholders over the long term, and I think you have seen us do that again this year.
And interestingly, Christopher Luxon, in the briefing that he gave on the results, was telling analysts and journalists, in fact, they've started to see off some of the competition. People such as Emirates have stopped flying the New Zealand-Australia route. American Airlines, who only just last year came in flying from North America, they've cut back their capacity, as has, in fact, Air New Zealand's partner United Airlines. Some of the Chinese airlines who are flying direct from places such as Xi'an and Chengdu, they've also curtailed their services. So all in all, Air New Zealand's rather confident, and they're talking about delivering better returns for next year, an increased profit, confident enough to give their staff, who are not on incentive schemes, a $1,700 bonus, and shareholders also rewarded with a slight increase in the dividend. So all in all, Air New Zealand's still flying quite high.
$1,700 for everyone, Giles. I suspect the senior people will have got a hell of a lot more than that, but everyone else...
Oh, the ordinary workers, shall we say. Those on incentive schemes will have done, I would think, a good deal.
Some zeros after the $1,700. Auckland Airport, we're sticking with aviation theme. Auckland Airport reporting today, right?
Well, Air New Zealand and Auckland Airport, they go hand in hand. 19 million people travelled through Auckland Airport in the past year. And it's a bit boring by comparison to the sort of sexiness of airlines. You know, we're talking about terminals, runways, parking buildings and the lot. But they are the country's biggest company by capitalisation, worth more or nearly $8.5 billion. Their profit up by a quarter in the past year, $333 million. That pace of growth is going to slow down, and they've got themselves some big spending coming. They're talking about spending $1 million a day in the next year as they upgrade their terminals, their taxiways, their air bridges, parking buildings and the like. But it's still a company that is going places. We should mention also in the earnings reports today, A2 Milk. This is the company which has the specialty infant formula, one of the share market darlings. It tripled its profit for the past year, nearly $90 million. And it also saw its share price rise quite strongly, 5% to a record high today.
Thanks, Charles. What happened on the markets today?
Top 50 index, for all that the earnings were good, the market took them largely in its stride. Top 50 index up 12.7879. The New Zealand dollar a little softer across the board. Possibly the prospect that the chances of a tax cut have receded after the opening of the books, I think, may be weighing on the markets. 72.4 US cents and 91.7 Australian.
Giles Beckford, our business editor, thank you very much indeed. 22 to 6 to Edgecombe now, where a public meeting will be held tonight to discuss a possible class action against the Bay of Plenty Regional Council following the devastating April floods when the Rangitaiki River burst the town's stock bank. More than 240 residents have already joined the action or a consideration of it, and 2 meetings will be held tonight, one for residents and one for business owners and farmers, to see if people are interested in going forward, to use the common parlance. John Erawera is one resident who'll be heading along. John wants to go and listen and take stock and work out what he's going to do. His property is 1k from the stock bank, where he and his family lost everything when 400 mils of water flooded his home on April 6. 400 mils. And the home was elevated about 400 mils, which means the water was getting close to a metre high. 4 months on, he says dryers are still drying out his home.
I remember the first time I walked into the home, the water had subsided obviously, but it was just, everything was water damage, soaked, and you had to pick up a book or something, and it was just all just sort of collapsed and peeled, how you do when something sits in water so long.
Yeah,
that's sort of how I remember it.
Have you been able to get back in?
We were able to get back in. Once we did get in, we tried to salvage as much as we could, but nothing was salvageable, unfortunately. And
so you lost your contents. You lost basically everything inside the house.
We lost everything inside the house. Now, I mean, that's part of it. But I really feel for the wife who had all our family albums, photo albums, a couple of hard drives and whatnot, and they were just gone.
All gone,
all gone. We tried carefully to take them apart and see if we could, but nothing was salvageable, unfortunately. So we literally lost everything.
Everything. Are you insured?
Yeah. We were insured, thankfully, unfortunately, yep. So, yeah,
but insurance doesn't give you your photos back and the precious things back, does it? And have you been able to move back into your home?
No, the sentimental things, we lost. Those unfortunately have gone, but we haven't been able to move into our house. So if I'm sitting outside the property at the moment, and they've stripped inside. There's no floor, and they've just got dryers that are drying down. The moisture content was so high in there.
John, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the flooding was in April, and there are dryers in there now in August.
Yeah. Well, they've been in there maybe 4 weeks at the max. And
so April, May, June, the dryers went in maybe in July. What happened? The rest of the time, did it just sit there wet?
Yeah, well, I think on one property of many that are going through the same situation. Get on good with our neighbours and whatnot, and they've only just started their drying process with their dryers. Whether there's a lack of dryers, or I'm not too sure what the reasoning was, but yeah, so that's where we are with the dryers and whatnot.
And so what are you hoping will happen tonight? Just some clarity around what happened, whether it could have been prevented, and whether or not there's a case against the council.
Yeah, I think me that's all I want. Get some information, get an understanding, and hopefully see where to from here. For me, it's we can't change because it's already happened now. But it's about seeing if something was like this was to happen again, or if there's what measures, what sort of process, however you want to look at what's going to be put in place. And then on the other side of things, if I use the word negligence on some parts, well, what's going to happen from there?
Will you be able to go back into your house? And if so, when do you think?
I've been speaking with we've got our builder that's been assigned to the whole restoration process. We met with the builder, met with the insurance, and the timeline they give us from when the dryers are free to when they start work, 3-month period. So fingers crossed, we may be looking around early December, late November.
And given what the river did, and given how much water there was from it, do you want to go back?
Well, that's a good question. My wife and I have spoken about it, and to be fair, we love where our house is situated. We love the community. I still work in local, so our pattern of thought is that we still love the area. We still love our house. Yes, we're still going to stay here.
John Erawera, committed to Edgecombe, those meetings about the possibility of a class action taking place tonight. One of the rescuers who spent hours searching for 3 children trapped in rubble following an earthquake in Italy says he promised the boys pizza when they got out. The 3 Mamolo brothers, aged from 7 months to 11 years old, were trapped for 14 hours before they were rescued following the magnitude 4 quake on the island of Ischia. Bridget Burke reports.
Cheers and applause as rescuers pull a 3rd boy from the rubble of a collapsed building on the Italian island of Ischia. 11-year-old Ciro Mamolo was the eldest of 3 brothers to be rescued after a magnitude 4 quake caused at least 6 buildings to collapse in the town of Casamicciola. Earlier in the day, firefighters pulled Ciro's 7-month-old baby brother Pasquale from the rubble, followed 7 hours later by 8-year-old Matthias. Rescuers credit Ciro with saving Matthias's life after he pushed him under a bed in the moments after the quake. The gesture is believed to have saved them both, and Ciro escaped with just a fractured foot. The boy's pregnant mother had been in the bathroom at the time and managed to escape out a window. Their father, Alessandro, was also rescued. 2 people were killed and 39 injured in the quake, which struck at the height of the tourist season, with the island's population of 64,000 ballooning by 150,000. 6 buildings, including a church, collapsed and more than 2,600 have been left homeless. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Coming up to 5:45, we've revealed tonight on Checkpoint the full cost of the convention centre in Christchurch is going to be about $475 million. The city is one step closer to getting a new stadium, with options on the long-awaited facility finally being revealed. Remember, this is our second largest city in population terms. It's the South Island's largest city, of course, and it's home to the best rugby team in the history of the Super Rugby competition. A government report on a multi-use arena near the central city released today details 4 options, ranging in cost from $368 million to more than $500 million. But as Maya Bari reports, it's not yet clear how a new stadium would be paid for.
The preferred stadium option, highlighted in the report, is a $496 million arena with a solid roof and retractable pitch that would have 25,000 permanent seats. The Christchurch City Council's head of parks, Andrew Rutledge, says the design would allow the stadium to host much more than just sports games, such as concerts, exhibitions and other events.
Stadia in the world, or multi-use arenas, are all moving towards retractable natural turf systems. We live in a world at the moment where the predominant users of stadia-type structures are sport, but it doesn't really make it financially sustainable for many cities. They need to get that turf out of the way so that they can host a multitude of events.
Christchurch has been making do with the temporary AMI Stadium, which seats 18,000 people, since the 2011 earthquake badly damaged Lancaster Park. Most people RNZ News spoke to in Christchurch were excited by the prospect of a new stadium, but others believed it wasn't a priority for the rebuilding city.
I think we probably need it to bring us into line with other cities around New Zealand to make sure that we're getting our fair share of hosting, and then all the tourism and economic benefits that flow off the back of that.
Really important. Brings people into Christchurch and it also brings concerts here as well.
I think we've got better things to spend money on, to be honest. I think investment needs to be made, infrastructure and what have you, but I think personally, I think there are other things that probably prioritise over a stadium.
I think we should be focusing on getting the city up and running. They've already got a stadium. We've got a cathedral that actually hasn't been fixed yet, and I think it's disgusting.
Yeah, I think it'll just be, like, aside from rugby, things like concerts and that sort of thing. I think it'll just be better for that sort of event.
I think it'll be a really good idea. People around here will get behind it. We need it, and they should spend as much as they can on it.
The Christchurch Mayor, Leanne Dalzell, says the council has committed $253 million to building a new arena, which could only cover the cost of a modest provincial venue. Ms Dalzell says it's clear the city would get the most versatility and the best financial return from the preferred option, but other funding partners will need to be found.
It'll be up to us to work with central government to look for meeting that funding shortfall, but I won't be going back to the people of Christchurch and asking them to meet that shortfall. We have to look to central government, we have to look to external partners, we have to look to the wider region in order to find that support.
The Canterbury Rugby Union Chair, Trevor McIntyre, says while it is a costly facility, it will help to make Christchurch an international destination. He did not think the rugby union should have to contribute to the stadium's construction, but believed the funds could be raised.
While I appreciate that it's an expensive facility to have in the city, that now that we've got some clarity around what it is that the community is saying that we want, we just need to continue to work together to see how we can put it all together financially.
The council and the government have agreed to set up a joint team to examine the 4 stadium options and prepare a business case. The minister supporting Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Nikki Wagner, says that will be an opportunity to look at who will help contribute to the costs of building the stadium. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Maya Bari.
A witness who says he was raped by his cellmate is suing the Department of Corrections for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The revelation emerged today as the prisoner gave evidence in the trial of his former cellmate, William Katipa. Katipa has denied 14 charges, including sexual violation and threatening to kill. The charges relate to 3 of his former cellmates. Auckland Court reporter Edward Gay has been covering the cases and in the studio. Nice to have you back, Eddie. What do we know about the witness suing Corrections?
Well, John, this came out under cross-examination from Katipa's lawyer, Andrew Speed.
And the witness confirmed he had instructed a lawyer who's filed papers in the High Court suing corrections, and Mr Speed said the figure was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, the witness said he hadn't seen the final papers filed, and he believed the figure was around $90,000, but he confirmed there were inconsistencies between his claim filed against corrections and the evidence he'd given in court, but he said he hadn't seen the draft papers before they were filed. He confirmed it was a large amount of money and it would change his life dramatically. At one point, he also told the court that his lawyer had struggled to get hold of him because he's homeless.
Right. The court's also heard about his criminal background, haven't they?
Yeah, that's right. And he has convictions for aggravated robbery, and he confirmed that he and a friend approached a man on Queen Street, and his friend held up an open umbrella to stop passers-by seeing what was going on as he held a knife to this man and asked for his cell phone. Police caught up with him, charged him on the day, gave him bail as well straight away, and that didn't stop him approaching 2 other people on the same day and threatening them with knives, demanding cash and cigarettes. The witness said he was on synthetics at the time. He was a young man. He also confirmed he had convictions for shoplifting, but said he did what he did to survive. And he said what he did was wrong, but he had to commit the crime to get food, cigarettes and drugs. And Mr Speed also asked him about a bomb threat that he made while inside prison. The witness said he made that call to Crime Stoppers in an effort to get the prison put into lockdown to avoid being beaten up by another prisoner.
Right, clearly he was in prison because the alleged offence took place in a cell, right? So why is his criminal history material?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the witness says that Katipa repeatedly raped him over a week while they shared this prison cell. He said at one point Katipa threatened him with a knife and told him not to say anything about what had happened. Now, his background's relevant because Katipa's defence is that this is all made up, that the witness is able to describe Katipa threatening him with a knife because that was exactly the sort of thing that the witness did. However, the witness said, he maintains he's telling the truth, he's an honest person, and that exactly did happen.
Edward Gay, who was in court again today, so the rest of us didn't have to be there. Thank you very much indeed, Eddie. We really appreciate it. It's 8.5 to 6. A farm in North Otago is under quarantine after the serious cow disease Mycoplasma bovis was discovered. The Ministry for Primary Industries has confirmed blood test results from animals at the farm show they've been infected. This is the first case found outside the Van Leeuwen Group, which owns several South Island farms. Logan Church reports.
It's not yet clear how Mycoplasma bovis arrived in New Zealand. It was only recently discovered at 2 farms, owned by the Van Leeuwen Group in South Canterbury, and now another farm is affected. A ministry spokesperson, Jeff Gwynn, says the third farm, near Owamaru, is under quarantine. He says extensive testing is underway.
We're in this for the long haul. We want to understand what our opportunities are for eradication. So we anticipate doing around 40,000 tests over the next couple of months across a variety of levels. Obviously the Van Leeuwen Group itself, neighbouring properties, trace properties such as this one, and there's a whole level of district, regional and national testing that's going on as well.
Mr Gwynn says some animals were transferred from the Van Leeuwen farms to Owamaru prior to the disease being discovered and a restricted place notice being issued. Cattle from Owamaru has then gone to 14 other properties. But Mr Gwynn says the disease is not running rampant across the country.
I think we are taking sensible risk mitigation measures, and I think I have a high level of comfort that the farms that we need to restrict movements on we have, which at this stage is only the 3.
A North Otago Federated Farmers spokesperson, Lyndon Strang, says the situation is under control and he doesn't believe farmers need to be worried. But he says all farmers in the area need to maintain good practices.
I think they've just got to keep their own on-farm biosecurity processes robust. They've got to make sure that people coming on and off their farm are decontaminated, and I think if they can avoid transferring animals onto their farms from an unknown source, then I think they should do that as well.
The Waitaki District Mayor, Gary Kircher, says he's disappointed the disease has been found in North Otago. The highly contagious disease causes mastitis, pneumonia, abortions, lameness and death in cattle. Mr Kircher says culling infected cows could be the only option to kill the disease.
I don't think there's any cure, so for the most part it will be culling cows and dealing with it that way. Obviously it's disappointing news. The good news is that it's been picked up, so the testing is working.
The Ministry for Primary Industries are now contacting the 14 farms who have received cattle from the Owamaru farm. For Checkpoints, Logan Church.
Let's turn to sport now, and the Black Ferns will take on England in the final of the Rugby World Cup to be played in Ireland on Sunday morning, New Zealand time. The semi-finals were played this morning. England beat France 20 points to 3, although the French team really pushed a strong English side. And New Zealand beat the USA 45-12, having only led 15-7 at half-time. The American women were physically imposing in the tight and had real speed out wide, testing the Black Ferns' defence right across the field. But the New Zealanders weathered it, remained composed and then erupted in the second half, scoring 7 tries in total, 4 of them to winger Portia Woodman. She's a phenomena, including a sublime solo effort and 1 to match it from Kelly Brazier. Eloise Blackwell, Ella to her friends, the team's tireless lock, who calls the line-outs for the Black Ferns, told me they knew the US would be demanding from the kick-off and they planned to soak it up, tire them out, stay calm, then explode.
Yeah, that's the thing about our team, is that we've got quite a few experienced girls spread throughout the field, and when games are close like that, we really call on those girls to kind of be the kind of settlers to things and just get us back into our game plan and just stick to what we know and what we've been training for, and then the results do eventually come.
It's sweet of you to talk about those more senior players as if they were other people. You're one of them. You've been playing for the Black Ferns for 6 years now.
Yeah, I still don't feel like a senior. It's more so Fee, our captain, and I guess Shorty or Salika out in the back, and heaps of the girls in the forwards too.
Yeah, there's some inspirational players around you. I saw that you cite Brad Thorne as your kind of role model as a rugby player because of his work rate, and I thought you had a phenomenal work rate today. You were just tackling, recommitting, getting in. You really played hard, didn't you? Yeah, I think as a tight forward, I've just got to make sure that I do my core roles first, and that's pretty much the ruck work, getting in tight, cleaning out, big ball carries, and then we let our backs finish it off for us. And good lineouts today against a really imposing, some really fine US jumpers. Yeah, no, they do have a good lineout and a good scrum as well. So our defensive lineouts is something we've been working on to try and combat them on attack, but also our attacking lineouts is it's sort of turned into a bit of a weapon for us the last 2 games, and that's something we've definitely been trying to improve, looking ahead to this, obviously, our semi-final and now our final. Let's talk about England, because they had a tough game against France. I thought the score slightly flattered England, actually. I thought it was closer than the score suggested, and they'll be buggered now, but they're a good team, aren't they? Yeah, they definitely are. We watched the first half hour of the game, and like you said, like it could have gone either way. The French were really putting it to the English, but that's the thing about England, is that they know how to play a full 80, and we've played them heaps the last couple of years, and we know what they're like, and they don't give up until the 80th minute. So we're definitely expecting a big battle from them. You have played them heaps. Your debut game was against England, wasn't it? Yeah, 2011. Yeah. A while ago. And they are the only team in the tournament who are fully professional. So they have been training. This has been full-time for them for a long time now, the preparation for exactly this game. Yeah. Yeah, and it's really awesome for women's rugby to actually have a team that are treated as professionals, and they're actually professional players. It's a really good look for women's rugby. Are you excited? I'm so excited. I can't wait. Just the feeling after the game, as the final whistle went, just, seeing the excitement in the girls, it was just awesome. Obviously that was my first semi-final at a World Cup, so that was, a really big thing for me too. And I just can't wait to hopefully get a spot in that final squad. Do you reckon the team can do it? I definitely believe we can do it. Good luck, Black Ferns. They're a joy to deal with, that team. They're amateurs mostly. The sevens players are on a kind of contract. I got that interview at 11:45. Eloise had done a warm down and she was just heading back to her room. 11:45, you got more chance of flying to Saturn than you have of getting an All Black at 11:45. We've got no pips. The pips have gone. Oh, I'm a minute early. I threw dramatically like a poor man's John Gielgud going into the break. And I thought, oh, that was magnificent. My timing was superb. I was out by a full minute.
Have you got any feedback?
Yeah, we got lots of feedback, and I'll read it. I do want to say, actually, the Black Ferns are a fantastic rugby team. It is wonderful to see the English women being professionals in the game of rugby for women. But the Black Ferns are, by and large, exactly as the All Blacks were before professionalism. They have other jobs.
How many World Cups now?
Yeah, exactly. Bit annoyed to hear some Air New Zealand employees got incentive payments of $1,700. I do not deny them probably well-earned payment, but I'm annoyed because Air New Zealand pulled out the whakatane kere and Westport because of the cost. The company's had a substantial profit every year since then. Thank goodness for Air Chatham's, but the fare to Auckland is 2 to 3 times higher than old fares. Our national airline really has let down New Zealand provinces. It's not forgotten, says Peggy. These are the
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. New Zealand First wants to lower the company tax rate from 28% to 25%. Its leader Winston Peters told a Business New Zealand election conference in Wellington today that not only would productivity rise, but workers would get a fairer shake of the stick.
We know money doesn't grow on trees. We know this money needs to be earned, but we also recognise that we are our brother's keeper. There's an obligation here, but New Zealand First is committed to giving business not only the means to pay higher minimum wages, but the means, more importantly, to grow and put themselves back where they should be as a country, as business people in the first world.
Winston Peters says the company tax rate would be reduced over 3 years, beginning in 2019. New Zealand First is also promising to raise the minimum wage from $15.75 to $20 an hour. Earlier, the ACT leader David Seymour told the conference New Zealand First MP Richard Prosser was an effing idiot for saying his party would buy back key state assets at the price they were sold for. Mr Peters said Mr Prosser's comments was, quote, a throwaway line that was not fully explained. He says his party's policy is to buy back power companies at an appropriate time in the future and only to buy back shares when they become available. The National Party leader, Bill English, says the pre-election update released today shows the economy is in good health. The update shows a surplus $2 billion bigger than forecast in May, although surpluses from 2019 onwards are smaller than forecast. The economy will also grow at a slower rate than forecast in May. Mr English says, however, that most signs are positive.
The forecasts show growth's a bit softer, but pleasingly they also show lower unemployment and more consistent growth in wages.
The National Party leader, Bill English. The Christchurch Central MP, Nikki Wagner, has revealed that Christchurch's planned convention centre will cost at least $475 million. That's $140 million more than was estimated to benefit the city over 8 years. The Prime Minister announced earlier this month that a $240 million contract had been awarded to the company CPB Contractors to complete the design and construction of the centre. However, Ms Wagner has told Checkpoint that once land acquisition and professional services are factored in, the total cost of the project would be nearly double that. Nearly 5 months after floodwaters swept through Edgecombe, frustration is mounting among people still unable to get back into their homes. The Whakatane District Council says only 5% of the 310 homes affected are fully restored, with the families living back in them. One man, John Eruera, says he's had dryers going non-stop for 3 weeks, but it could still be a while before his house is completely dry and he can start patching up the damage and move back in. Mr Eruera says many of his neighbours are in the same situation.
There's a lot of emotion tied up in that, but in terms of where we are now to the future, we're just looking forward to moving back in. That's probably the key thing for us, is when do we get to, or when can we move in? And obviously we're one of how many residents that are going through the exact same thing.
John Eruera says he and many others will be at a public meeting tonight to discuss a possible class action against the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. A health leader says the finances of the Canterbury District Health Board should be independently reviewed. The board is facing a $54 million deficit because of extra costs associated with quake repairs and a hospital rebuild. The Health Ministry is insisting, however, that the deficit be cut by $36 million this financial year. Our health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
The ministry says the board needs to copy other DHBs and cut spending, including by curtailing overseas travel. The Health Minister, Jonathan Coleman, also says leasing buildings and changing depreciation rates might help. But Victoria University's Dean of Health, Gregor Costa, a former DHB chair, says the DHB is well led and efficient and the pressure on it is disappointing. He says an independent review of its finances is required, as well as a fresh look at the funding formula for all DHBs. Ko Karen Brown tēnei.
The Electoral Commission says it's been getting up to 5,000 voter enrolments a day, and numbers are tracking slightly ahead of the 2014 election run-up. As of last week, 450,000 eligible voters had not yet enrolled, half of them under 30. The Chief Electoral Officer, Alicia Wright, says the total number of enrolments has doubled since then. Today is the final day to enrol on the printed electoral roll. From tomorrow, people can still enrol, but will have to cast a special vote. It's 6:05. In sport, Auckland businessman Paul Davis has withdrawn his bid to buy the Warriors Rugby League club. He says he pulled out because of what he calls a confusing process presented by co-owner Eric Watson. Davies had offers $15 million for the club, while Watson wanted $20 million. Black Ferns coach Glenn Moore says his side will need to lift their game to beat England in the final of the Women's Rugby World Cup. The New Zealanders stayed on track for a fifth cup with a 45-12 win over the United States in their semi-final in Belfast, while defending champions England beat France 20-3. Moore says the Ferns' first half effort today wasn't good.
Well, it's incredible to reach the final. We're really satisfied with that, but we made particularly hard work of that in the first half. They come with a lot in that first 40 minutes and, we just made too many errors around the breakdown where we were turning ball over.
Glenn Moore. The New Zealand Breakers have finalised their 11-man playing roster for the upcoming Australian basketball season, retaining 24-year-old guard Jordan Ngatai. Meanwhile, the Cleveland Cavaliers have reportedly agreed to trade all-star point guard Kyrie Irving to the Boston Celtics in exchange for a package led by fellow all-star point guard Isaiah Thomas. Irving moves on from a Cavaliers squad that reached the NBA Finals in each of the last 3 seasons and won the title in 2016. That's the news.
Party time for politicians.
Look, there's money in the kitty. There's lollies in the lolly jar that can be dispensed. We've got options and we'd like to have those options.
Party at Clive's.
We did get a complaint from a neighbour at about midnight, yes. And a party's a success when that happens, right?
And a sweetener for down south.
It's about redeveloping the existing Cadbury World tourist attraction to create some jobs, to drive tourism and, importantly, for us to leave a lasting legacy in the city.
Sweet As Morning Report with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, is Wellington prepared for a full-scale emergency response if disaster hits? And after 10, Lisa Feldman-Barrett, the neuroscientist who's contradicting a century of scientific thought on how emotions are made. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula fine apart from some isolated showers, mainly in the east. Gisborne mainly fine, a few light showers possible about the coast. For the remainder of the North Island, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with morning frost. Buller and Westland, fine apart from a few showers. Fiordland, Southland and Otago, occasional rain about Fiordland and Stewart Island. Cloudy periods elsewhere with scattered showers tomorrow, and the Chatham Islands mostly cloudy with occasional showers. It's exactly 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
As I stumble in, dropping papers. Thank you, Katrina Batten. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. The books were open today and we are going to look at what it all means. Now, 2 important people in the next few weeks joining us. Labor has ruled out putting up income taxes, including the top personal rate, if it wins power next month. This follows the opening of the government's books today, which showed the surplus for the year to June coming in a whopping $2.1 billion ahead of forecasts. But wait, there's less. That should be music to the ears of politicians on the campaign trail. But, and there's a big but, the forecast surplus growth tails off after that and is expected to be lower than estimates made in the May budget. National says that means there isn't room for further tax cuts, or not much anyway, beyond the package it's already announced. What other measures to boost family incomes until 2020? It's finance spokesperson Stephen Joyce joins us now in the Wellington studio. No, you're on the phone. Are you there, Mr. Joyce?
Hello, John. How are you?
Yeah, good. How are you?
I'm well, mate. Very
Good.
well.
You're good. Are you still well?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's...
Should I not be?
Well, let's make the assessment of where this leaves you. Does it change your approach to the election campaign, what you learned today when the books were open?
No, I don't think it does. I'd anticipated that probably the Treasury numbers would be a little softer because we had 6 months slightly softer growth from the December and March quarters, which means we're sort of a lower starting point. And it's still very respectable. We're talking 3% a year over the next 4 years on average versus 3.1, so we're not massively different. And what it means is there's a couple of changes. The unemployment rate is predicted to drop earlier to 4.3% by June in 3 years' time. And also the Treasury is now expecting stronger wage growth over that period as well. And
sorry, forgive me for interrupting. They are expecting stronger wage growth, but boy, that's off a low base. And it's still not high wage growth, is it?
Well, no, that's not correct. In terms of real wage growth, actually, New Zealand has been one of the better performing countries in the OECD over the last few years because our inflation has been so low, but wage growth has been not spectacular, nominal wage growth, but there has been some. And as a result, we're doing steadily better than, for example, the US or the UK and other countries like that.
Okay.
So if you actually have a look, I mean, it doesn't feel as much in your pocket because the inflation's been so low. Last year inflation was nil, so anything that anybody got extra in terms of extra hours worked or extra money actually flowed through in terms of increased spending power.
What are you going to do? What are you going to do with that big surplus in the short term?
Well, it's important, and you've pointed it out. It's a one-off, so it's literally $2.1 billion. So if you were to spend it and you wanted to, say, for example, create something that was recurring expenditure, which is how most of the operating expenditure does, you're talking about $300 million a year, which isn't a lot compared to some of the bigger ticket items that governments invest in. So from my perspective, it leaves us in roughly a similar situation. Our cash position, if you like, the cash you have after you've invested in the infrastructure is still about nil once we've gone through the 3 years, so quite big surpluses. Then big investment in infrastructure means that the amount of cash available after that is actually quite low until 2020, which is why I've said we wouldn't do a second family incomes package until 2020 because we wouldn't want to be borrowing to do that.
Okay, and perversely, and forgive me for sounding impertinent in this question, does this play to the National Party's almost proud lack of imagination? Because
that's a bit unfair.
Well, hold on a sec.
Highly imaginative.
No, but aren't you talking about steady as she goes? Isn't that your pitch? Isn't
the
calm modulated?
Actually, I'd go further than that. We have a strong economic story. Last year we were the fifth fastest growing in the OECD.
Except let's look forward rather than looking back.
That's right.
If your surpluses had continued big, if your surpluses had continued at the level we're about to get for a longer term, you would have had to have done something with them, right? Now you can say, well, whoops-a-daisy, actually there's nothing we can do. Therefore, you can be excused action, can't you?
Well,
inaction.
Look, I mean, I'm sorry, John. There's not inaction when you're investing the largest amount in public services that's been invested for a long time, the largest extra health spend in 11 years, massive infrastructure spend, and supporting family incomes. And it's actually only by having a economy growing at 3%. And steadily at 3%, not just 1 year, that you're able to do those things all at once and get your debt tracked in. I would say, actually, with the greatest respect to you, actually, it's one of the strongest performances in the OECD, and we're going to keep doing it.
Largest extra health spend is, of course, a numerical thing. You've increased it absolutely, but it's not enough. There's a sense that it's not enough. And
it's more than a numerical thing. It's also a very big percentage increase. We are talking nearly $4 billion just from a month and a half ago, from July 1 this year, nearly $4 billion of additional money going into health over the next 4 years.
So why are DHBs struggling? Why are DHBs in deficit, which effectively means they don't have enough money to do what they want to do? And why do so many people contact us every time you or the Prime Minister are on the radio saying how good things are and say, we're doing it really tough. What's the disconnect?
Well, nobody's arguing that everybody's doing it the way they would want to do it, and that's why we're doing all those things. It's why the family incomes package comes in at 1 April next year. I've had all these interesting discussions because we're doing lots of these like the Business New Zealand session today, where other politicians say, families aren't getting enough, and then they rule out reducing the tax rates or shifting the tax thresholds, which is actually how you get money to families, is making sure that they keep more of what they earn. And that's what's important. From 1 April next year, because of the hard work of New Zealanders, we're able to do that. If you talk the public services and the health expenditure, again, very, very big investments in that. And in terms of the DHB deficits, it's a long story which we could get into, but a lot of that is actually what you call non-cash deficits. In other words, it's because of depreciation and those sorts of things. So we've got to be careful not to overplay that. It's significant, but in actual fact, the amount that's going into increased services is very, very significant.
Stephen Joyce, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Let's go to Grant Robertson, who I think is standing by on the phone. Mr. Robertson, are you there?
I am, John.
Nice to talk to you. Welcome to Checkpoint. It's nice to have you both on the program. This plays to the Nats more than a place to Labor, doesn't it? Because actually what it says in the short term is precisely what National is saying, is there's just enough money for steady as she goes.
Yeah, no, I don't think so for two reasons. The first is if you just go one level below that GDP number, things don't look quite as rosy. So GDP per capita, per person wealth in New Zealand, and Stephen just alluded to this, has actually gone backwards for the last 2 quarters, and in this update today has been forecast down again. Exports are flat, productivity, output per hour, flat as well.
Except isn't that problematic for you more than National? I'm sorry to interrupt, but isn't that more problematic for you than National? Because if you are the party of reform, if you are the party of re-engagement with the disconnected underclass, if you are the party that is going to make a difference by spending, there is less than you had hoped to spend.
No, I mean, we put out our fiscal plan in July, and bear in mind, John, that we've got different settings and different priorities from National. So we're not doing the tax cut package that they proposed in the budget in May. We've got a slightly different debt repayment track that gives us a bit more room to address the massive underfunding in health, and I do want to respond to that in a moment. But no, look, what we're saying is we've got a different plan for the economy. We want to invest in skills. We want R&D to grow. We want to make sure our small businesses have got capital. So I look at this budget and say, yep, National's drifting along again. We have a different plan, but we've also given ourselves a different spending track.
You have a different plan. Can you do that plan as resolutely, as singularly, as you had hoped after the books have been opened after today?
Yeah, look, we were obviously waiting to see what was in the books, and we had a number of different scenarios that we were going to look at depending on what was there, but we're absolutely confident that we can deliver to New Zealanders the plan that we laid out in July, and 1 or 2 extra announcements that we'll be making during the election campaign that are about addressing the big underfunding and the big social deficits that have grown in New Zealand. And John, I do want to mention the health thing, because I want to say something about what you've been doing on this show, because you've been highlighting, and I've been listening to the person after person who is noticing that there has been underfunding in their health.
Right, how would you respond to that? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, well, what we've already said is that we will be spending an extra $8 billion over the next 4 years on top of what National have already put in the budget. And what Stephen is failing to recognise is he says they're spending a record amount of money that just has not kept up with inflation and with our growing and ageing population. $2 billion worth of not keeping up. So what we've committed to is that in every budget we will fund for inflation and for population growth, and we will begin to restore the underfunding that's happened. Stephen, wants to make out that's not happening, but the people you are talking to every day are experiencing what happens when you don't put $2.3 billion into the health budget.
Right, we've heard Stephen Joyce, and we hear the government, and they are articulating more of the same, inevitably after 9 years. And they are saying, actually, unemployment is down, wage growth is up. Growth isn't bad. In fact, it's not bad at all relative to just about everyone else in the OECD. What is Labor's point of difference in comparison to that?
Well, our point of difference is that we want to see prosperity shared, John, and the reality is that on a per-person basis, our growth doesn't compare as well internationally. If you actually look at wages, this year, the year in which New Zealanders are actually living now, wages won't keep up with inflation. And I'm not the only person saying wage growth is sluggish. The Reserve Bank Governor and others have been saying that too. So what we're about is saying, yes, New Zealand relative to the rest of the world can point to a top-line growth rate that looks good. But actually on the ground, people know that they're struggling to get ahead. We believe in a shared sense of prosperity and those public services that we all rely on that have been underfunded getting what they need.
Grant Robertson, who is Labour's finance spokesperson, joining us after Stephen Joyce, who is, of course, National's finance spokesperson. Thank you very much indeed, both of you, for joining us this evening. And civilised discourse. Speaking of which, not fake news is trumping privacy, and cyberbullying is the fastest growing worry for Kiwi web users. A new survey into New Zealand's attitudes to the internet shows 2/3 of people are concerned about misleading information online, a 13% jump up from last year. What can you believe? And how do you know? Are these fears founded? Eva Corlett filed this report.
What we want to see in the United States is honest, beautiful, free, but honest press. We want to see fair press. I think it's a very important thing. We don't want fake news. And by the way, not everybody is fake news, but we don't want fake news. Bad thing, very bad for our country.
The term fake news has become ubiquitous in news, social media and politics, with a great deal of help from United States President Donald Trump. And according to Internet NZ's latest study, New Zealanders are becoming increasingly fearful of it. RNZ News spoke to a number of people in Auckland's Aotea Square to see how their views might match the research.
I know how to detect them because I'm doing like digital design stuff, so yeah, I'm aware of which one is fake news and then I can tell the difference of the fake websites.
I'm not concerned about it. I feel like I'm getting more and more au fait with it and picking it, or in certain headlines you just think, what, really? Whereas in the past I would have thought, oh my God, really?
And there's so much more opinion, and opinion isn't fact.
I think the issue is we get so much information that people forget the importance of knowing how to think and how to sift and weigh evidence.
Well, you always triangulate, and look at other, like BBC or CNN, the big ones.
Internet NZ's Andrew Cushion says while there's not a lot of fake news in New Zealand, people are likely to have been influenced by global reporting about the problem.
New Zealanders may be more attuned to what happens around in the world because so many of us are overseas and are potentially impacted by that. But equally, I think that people do use the internet to access information, not just about New Zealand, but around the world.
Mr Cushion says the figures reflect New Zealanders' growing awareness about what type of information is now available. The editor of Stuff, Patrick Crudson, agrees that the concerns are an imported fear.
People should always consume media with a critical eye, but there isn't an industry of fake news merchants trying to deceive with fake stories about New Zealand or from New Zealand.
Mr Crudson says the growing fear shows that public figures are using the term perniciously in an attempt to condemn reporting that doesn't serve their agenda. But Wayne Hope, a professor of communication studies at AUT, believes social media use is creating a fake news problem in New Zealand.
Social media interaction, social media gossip goes viral and often reported as fact in the mainstream news media. The speed and density of social media communication means it's hard to verify stories, it's hard to source them, so we're caught up in a tyranny of real time. And the thing about fake news is that it comes out of government, it comes out of the news media itself, and it comes off of websites. So it's a really, really pervasive problem.
Mr Hope says misleading information could lead to a loss of trust in the media and political systems. He says every child should have internet education to determine what is reliable and unreliable information. Internet NZ's survey also revealed that security threats to personal information and cyberbullying are big concerns for New Zealanders. Meanwhile, 73% of users thought access to information was the internet's greatest benefit. I tāmaki makaurau mō te hoa tako te ahiahi, ko Eva Corlett, tēnei.
Let's go to the United States, where the governor of Missouri has issued a stay of execution for a convicted killer just hours before he was scheduled to die by lethal injection. Marcellus Williams was sentenced to death in 2001 for the brutal stabbing death of Leisha Gale, a former reporter during a burglary, but real doubt over his guilt. Linda So from Reuters reports.
Hours before convicted killer Marcellus Williams was scheduled to die by lethal injection, Missouri's governor has halted his execution. The decision comes after his attorneys argued recent DNA evidence shows he is innocent. Williams was convicted in the 1998 death of Felicia Gale, a former reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch newspaper. She was found stabbed 43 times inside her home. Williams' lawyer has asked the U.S. Supreme Court to stop the execution scheduled for Tuesday night based on new evidence that was not available at the time of the killing. That evidence, his lawyer argues, shows Williams' DNA was not found on the murder weapon.
Any fair-minded person could look at this and say, I don't think this guy is guilty.
The Missouri Attorney General's office rejects the lawyer's claim, saying Williams' guilt was proven without DNA evidence, and the execution should go on as planned. Williams has maintained his innocence. Nearly 170,000 people have signed an online petition urging the governor to issue Williams clemency.
That report from Reuters. The wife of US Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin has apologised for a series of Instagram posts after being mocked around the world on social media. Louise Linton hit the headlines for the wrong reasons after she posted photos of herself stepping off a taxpayer-funded plane, wearing at least $20,000 in clothes and accessories. She might have not been noticed had she not tagged the names of the high-end brands she was wearing. When a mother of three from Oregon commented that her behaviour was deplorable, Linton, well, she replied. CNN's Randy Kay has the story.
The controversy took flight soon after her plane landed. That's when Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin's wife, Louise Linton, posted on Instagram, bragging about flying with her husband on a government plane to Kentucky to visit Fort Knox. Linton, who has a reputation for flaunting her wealth, appeared to be carrying an Hermes handbag, which sells for about $10,000. Mnuchin's 36-year-old wife then tagged a series of luxury designers: Roland Mouret, Hermes, Tom Ford, and Valentino. Linton's Instagram started to pick up steam. One Instagrammer who was offended by the post was an Oregon mom named Jenny Miller. Glad we could pay for your little getaway. #deplorable.
I honestly didn't know who she was. To then be tagging everything she was wearing with all these expensive European designer names just seemed ridiculous and, quite frankly, offended me as someone who paid for part of their trip.
But it didn't end there. Instead of letting it go, Louise Linton ripped into the Oregon mother of three with a long, condescending rant that oddly included a series of kiss emojis. @JennyMiller29. Cute. Aw, did you think this was a personal trip? Adorable. Then, before it was over, Linton called Miller adorably out of touch, suggesting she go chill out and watch the new Game of Thrones.
There are probably better ways to spend her time and money than trying to make me feel bad about my simple, cute life.
Louise Linton, a former actress from Scotland, has long touted her wealth and Hollywood lifestyle. Of all things, she played Marie Antoinette in this 2007 episode of CSI. And keep in mind, Louise Linton and her Treasury Secretary husband were visiting Kentucky, one of the poorest states in the country. That only added to Jenny Miller's frustration, who felt Linton could have done something to help the children of Kentucky instead of bragging about her expensive wardrobe. Jenny Miller didn't even know that Linton had responded to her until her sister told her about it.
It was as tone-deaf as her original post, and that it was very ironic that she was calling me out of touch and assuming things about me and just being so condescending and so incredibly rude.
Jenny Miller didn't drop it either, posting again, "Apparently I offended this deplorable girl I had never heard of until today. According to my 20-second Google search, she's married to an old rich guy in a wedding attended by other couples of similar age and beauty gaps." But that post never made it to Louise Linton's Instagram page. By then, she had changed the setting to private. This was hardly the first time Linton was caught up in controversy. Last year, the memoir she wrote about her time in Zambia in the 1990s, when she was just 18, also got her in hot water. In the book titled In Congo's Shadow, Linton painted herself as what critics called a white savior when she wrote about becoming a central character in the horror story of the Congolese War. She wrote, "I try to remember a smiling, gap-toothed child with HIV whose greatest joy was to sit on my lap and drink from a bottle of Coca-Cola." The Washington Post says the book was panned as racist and full of misrepresentations and ridiculous cliches about Africa. It all gave rise to the hashtag Linton Lies, and Linton pulled the book from sale. She later apologized for offending anyone.
Randy Kay ending our program for tonight. Thank you for being with us on behalf of the Checkpoint team. A very good evening. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. New Zealand First wants to lower the company tax rate from 28% to 25%. The National Party leader, Bill English, says the pre-election update shows the economy in good health. Christchurch's planned convention centre will cost at least $475 million. In nearly 5 months after the Edgecombe flood, only 5% of the 310 homes affected are fully restored. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Comedian Ben Hurley gets serious on being funny.
This idea of being funny, I've always struggled with, because the funniest people I know aren't comedians and couldn't be comedians. One of my best friends is the funniest guy I know. He works for a bank, but he couldn't be a comedian. Being a comedian's about being very self-aware, being clever, being confident, having something to say.
Just one thing. On RNZ's podcast page, iTunes, and after the midday news Sunday on Standing Room Only with Lynn Freeman on RNZ National.
This is Trending Now, our feature highlighting the stories you've been sharing via digital and social media. First, here's 9 to Noon's political commentators from Monday. Matthew Hooton and Stephen Mills join Catherine Ryan.
Let's have a stock take on where we're at after the past week. Slightly less melodramatic than the 3 weeks that have preceded, I beg your pardon, but in some ways what's going to be most interesting about the next week or two is whether some of these big shifts are cemented